Hey everybody, Rick Oakland here from Wave Games with episode 27 of Indie Game Dev Report. I know it's been over a year since the last episode. Clearly things have slowed down here, and today I want to catch everyone up on what I've been up to. First off, people who only follow me here on the podcast are probably wondering where I went. The answer is kind of simple. I've been streaming a lot this last year, and if I'm being completely honest, that kind of scratches the itch that drove me to make this podcast in the first place. My focus has been on the Twitch channel, simply called Rick Oakland, spelled RIKOCLON, my name obviously, but I also stream simultaneously to my Wave Games YouTube channel. I don't plan to completely stop the podcast, but I also don't have any real plans for it at the moment. I still have an interview list, and I occasionally meet new people who I would love to interview. But the reality is, it's a lot of work and planning to make an interview episode. I'm not saying it won't ever happen again, I just don't have anything lined up at the moment. On Twitch, the communication is more of a two-way street. Instead of me just talking to one developer or team, I'm now chatting with the entire community. Developers, artists, other streamers, enthusiasts, retro gamers, you name it. It's a ton of fun to chat with all these people because it's live. I don't have to worry about scheduling things across time zones with busy people or going through and editing things. I get to go as long as I want, and it's pretty common that I'll go for 8 hours or more. The content I focus on is mostly game dev stuff, but I also play some games with friends there. Indiana Crones, a content creator I've been following for years, has accepted me into their friend group, and I'm honored to play games with all those folks on a scheduled basis. So massive shout out to Indiana Crones, and also Garden of Indie, Cardboard Tier, Lizard Jam, Cyphex Aethermind, The Electric Mindset, Big Lumby, The Indie Maniac, Gonzo, Lot Lizards R Us, and everyone else who has joined the collab streams. On most nights, after we play games, I usually stay on and work on some game dev stuff or art, and on other nights, I just jump right into my work. I've streamed 5 different game jams so far, which has been a crazy amount of fun. I remember when I first found live game jam streams back in like 2018, my mind was completely blown. I thought, how the hell do people manage something like that? And now I'm at a point in my career where I can do the same thing, and it's honestly so fun and exciting. Then, after the jam, I have a recording of me making an entire game from scratch. I'm making time lapses so people can watch the entirety in one sitting, but if people wanted to, they could watch the whole thing being made in real time, or even as it happens. Streaming is quite a bit different from the podcast in a lot of ways, but for me it's actually a similar outlet. I get to teach people, learn things, meet people, and chat, while at the same time I'm actually getting things done, doing work and advancing my career. Since freelancing and game dev has become a full-time job for me, I love being able to stream while I work, assuming there's no NDA involved. So it's been over a year. What the heck have I been up to? And honestly, the last episode, I might have talked a little bit about my personal life. The truth is I haven't really talked about everything I've been up to in a lot longer than a year, since the podcast isn't usually about me. But it's been long enough where I feel like I need to catch people up a bit. You may recall years ago now, I was living in Phoenix, Arizona, and Retro Spaceball was my main project. I was also suffering from chronic pain and was going to different doctors to find the source, which led me to begin physical therapy, which everyone thought would help, even though they couldn't figure out the source of the pain. Around 2021, I lost my day job at a picture framing studio and started freelancing full-time. I worked for a handful of different clients until finding a client who was well-funded and needed a lot of work from me. And I worked for them almost exclusively for years, making custom mods for their YouTube channels, which collectively had something like 7 or 8 million subscribers. I was still going strong on Retro Spaceball, and the podcast showed its first signs of slowing down. In 2022, my mother was diagnosed with brain cancer, and right as that happened, someone moved into one of the adjacent condos in my building and started some type of drug lab. Phoenix is kind of known for this, and the neighbor basically fumed me out of my condo. I stayed with a friend for a week and then moved to Illinois to live with my mom and help her and her husband out with things as she was going through living with brain cancer. I was still working from home. The neighbors from hell basically ousted me from my condo. The police and DEA wouldn't lift a finger, so I just had to dip. And with my mom's condition, the choice was obvious. They needed the help, and I could be home all day to help. It gave me an opportunity to reconnect with my mom and give back for all the support she's given me over the years. Not long after moving into my mom's, my main client expanded his team and was no longer relying on me as much, and for a culmination of other reasons, less work was coming my way. And I was okay with this, since I was still going strong on Retro Spaceball and my mom's condition was getting worse, not to mention a lot of my bills were now covered, and my mom and her husband even fed me. My mom's husband did a lot of cooking, and it was almost always very Italian dishes. Well, after a year or so, I was noticing issues with my gut, and I was still dealing with the chronic pain, which had only gotten worse. Naturally, I went to the doctor who told me to see a gastro specialist. The gastro specialist finally asked the question that I needed to be asked, and it changed my life. He asked, Have you ever thought maybe you have celiac disease? My initial response was, no, I've been eating gluten my whole life. But then it hit me. I had just told this guy that I had stomach issues for my whole life. So on the way home, I got some gluten-free food, and I thought I'd give it a shot. Sure enough, within 3 days of eating gluten-free, the chronic pain had completely left me. I've been gluten-free ever since, and my gut has actually started healing. I've been able to exercise regularly without pain. I'm able to keep weight on for the first time in my life. I was able to begin to fix my posture. I'm forever grateful that I figured out what was wrong with me, even though it took me as long as it did. Around this time, a new opportunity came my way, and I was selected to manage a team of game devs for a new studio called Nuke Pop. We made Little Screamies, a walking simulator puzzle game with a cute horror kind of theme. It's a short game and completely free on Steam. It's got about 30 reviews, so it kind of flew under the radar, but most of the people who played it really enjoyed it. A small speedrunner community leaped on it, beating the game in about 5 minutes, which is still mind-blowing. Most people spend about 45 minutes playing it. It actually got a bit more organic reach than I thought it would, considering Steam's algorithm pushes games that make a lot of revenue, and a completely free game with no DLC or in-app purchases is kind of stuck not making any revenue. The game features cute creatures that get exposed to chemicals that change them into spooky creatures. And the whole thing takes place in an eerie lab. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, go check it out. It's free, like I said. I managed the team, but I also got to work on a whole lot of the game. If someone on the team was excited to work on something, then I let them work on that part. And I was kind of left to work on all the parts of the development that no one really wanted to work on or couldn't find the time to work on. So I got to do a lot of environmental art, lots of Blender, lots of materials and textures, tons of sound effects and background music, some game design, level design, narrative design, some programming, and tons of debugging, among other things. After Little Screamies, the team and I started working on another project that was sadly eventually canceled for reasons outside of my control. And since it's under NDA, there isn't much I can say about that project. After that, the team disbanded, and while the studio still exists, they've restructured almost completely, and I'm no longer part of it. During Little Screamies' development, I was having trouble working on Retro Spaceball. Though they are both Unity games, the architecture is completely different, and jumping back and forth was making my head spin. Around this time, I picked up a retro handheld called the Miu Mini Plus, and was instantly inspired to try to make games that would play on it. I grabbed GB Studio, and during my free time, I started to sink my teeth into learning it. I always wanted to make homebrew games, and though I tried to learn 6502 assembly to make NES games, that was really tough and gave me a lot of trouble. GB Studio, on the other hand, was easy to learn, and I felt at home right away. That's when I started making my game Source Hack, a puzzle adventure game with a cyberpunk hacking theme set in a dystopian future. It started as a game jam project for GB Compo 23, and I completed it in a way that was open to future updates and adding more levels. And honestly, I'm still working on updates for it. Mostly I've been using that game as a way to familiarize myself with the engine and to learn how to make a variety of features. Also, that's when I started to meet the homebrew community, which was very similar to the larger indie game community, but much smaller and much more niche. I started practicing making Game Boy art more and more, and eventually felt confident in using only 3 or 4 colors and 8x8 tiles or 16x16 sprites. It's a fun challenge. Same with all the other Game Boy limitations. Starting with a large project with tons of variety let me run into a whole bunch of hurdles right away, kind of like finding the perimeter of a dark room void of any light. I was getting a better idea of what the hardware was capable of. About a year after picking up GB Studio, I started to stream again. Now, technically, I started streaming way back in December of 2017, and though I started off really strong back then, streaming daily for hours at a time for like the first month, before long, my streams started to dwindle. I started again in 2019 and streamed kind of on and off until I moved back to Illinois and felt comfortable enough to stream there. I had been promoting Source Hack for most of a year and meeting other homebrew folks and playing a ton of other homebrew games and demos on my Miu Mini. So naturally, one of the first things I streamed was a bunch of homebrew games that I was really enjoying. One of those was Palooza Saga Kaji's Trials for the NES, developed by Johnny Manjiro and published by Broke Studio. I put a tweet out and tagged Broke Studio, and I imagine that Johnny saw that tweet somehow because, lo and behold, he hopped into my stream to watch me play his game. He and I kind of hit it off, and before long, we were talking shop. He realized that I was an artist and developer and working in GB Studio, and he mentioned that he was working on a new NES game that he was thinking about finishing in GB Studio. He asked me if I'd be interested in working on the art for his new game, and that we could split the profit. I don't often do rev share projects, since I've been burned in the past, but I was impressed with Johnny's developer abilities and said yes. We eventually went on to make his game into Pyrotoad for the Game Boy Color. Pyrotoad is a precision puzzle platformer where you play as a toad that can shoot fire. It's a super tough game, and Johnny's work as a Super Mario World ROM hacker is evident in this title for sure. While the start of the game is pretty accessible to just about anyone, it ramps up in difficulty pretty quick. If you like challenges, this one's for you. Just a few months into Pyrotoad's development, I started a new project for a week-long game jam called GB Jam. This is the first time I streamed an entire game jam. I made Demon Fish Dead Ahead, which is coming soon to Steam now. You can play the demo and wishlist it on Steam right now. Release is planned for November. The game jam version was 1/4 of the full game and had some pretty bad bugs during the jam. I was a few days late in starting what was a 10-day jam, so I only had 7 days. Also, streaming the whole thing was new to me, and I learned that things happen a little slower sometimes on stream. I like to take time to chat with people, explain my older projects to newer viewers, and explain what I'm working on as I work on it. Well, I was very down to the wire at the end, and barely finished adding the experience-based leveling system, which I felt the game needed. Sadly, I made the mistake of leaving no time to test things, and I accidentally forgot to input a value into a field. So instead of giving you your max health when you leveled up, it set the player's health to 0, making it pretty much impossible to do anything after reaching your first level up, which happened really quickly. That hurt. And to make it worse, the rules of the game jam wouldn't allow for any updates after the jam ended for the first month. So for that first month, Demon Fish Dead Ahead was basically unplayable and did pretty terrible during the jam. For people who reached out to me still excited about the game, I sent out a patched version that fixed the bug, but I was still pretty devastated. I got back to work on Pyrotoad, and then another game jam got my attention. This time, it was the Pursuing Pixels game jam, which was thrown by Pursuing Pixels podcast, which covered Retro Spaceball at one point. It was another 10-day jam, and this time I used all 10 days and left time for testing. I streamed the whole thing and made a sound toy called Bit Dropper. It's basically a finger drumming sampler for the Game Boy. I made 128 different audio samples, organized them into banks that you could select, so when you hit different buttons on the Game Boy, it makes different sounds. I also made 16 optional background beats at different BPMs, and 16 different animated backgrounds that fill the screen. Bit Dropper is a crazy amount of fun to play with, and I'm probably going to make a Volume 2 version before too long. Lots of people loved it. Music makers and kids especially seem to enjoy it. The first thing my nephew said to me when he saw me once was, "Can I play Bit Dropper again?" A bunch of French people downloaded the game, which to me is super cool because, as many music people know, France seems to always have their finger on the pulse these days, musically speaking. And much later, another producer I met on Twitch used it with a virtual modular synth alongside LSDJ, which is a tracker for the Game Boy, to make some really interesting and unique music. The game is free, but it's received countless donations, and I'm very proud of it. I also still pick it up to play with all the time. After Bit Dropper, it was back to Pyrotoad for a bit. I was also getting back into making Retro Spaceball, and I started to realize how hard it was to get back into. The project is kind of bloated and full of tech debt and old code. Some of the code I wrote back in 2017 and 2018. I spent a lot of time reworking the physics and refactoring the architecture. Tons of under-the-hood things. And at this point, Twitter had already been shitified, and I wasn't getting anywhere near the reach that I was getting in the years prior. It was really hard to be motivated during this time. Things were looking pretty bleak at home, and with my paid work, Pyrotoad was pretty much the only thing that I had going for me at that moment. As my mom's health was breaking down, I was looking at affordable homes and new locations to move to. I ended up choosing Oklahoma because it had very little crime and very affordable homes. The storms and tornadoes were definitely a consideration, and I started studying tornado trend maps before deciding on a neighborhood I felt could be safe. Also made sure the home had a storm shelter. My mom traveled with me to help look at houses. Eventually I picked one and moved in. Within months of moving in, my mom's health took a turn, and I was back in Illinois to be with her in her last days. It was very sad, but in many ways I'm grateful that I was given the opportunity to spend time with her and to not be completely taken surprised by her death. Some people don't get a warning when they lose a parent, and sometimes things that should be said don't have the opportunity to be said. I got to help out in her time of need and be there for her, and though it wasn't easy for me to be there and watch it all go down, I know I made the right decision to be there for her. I went back and forth from Oklahoma to Illinois for a bit to be there for the funeral and to get the rest of my stuff from my mom's house. And then it was time to start a new life in a new place where I knew absolutely no one. Streaming quickly became my only real social life. Working on Pyrotoad and a handful of other client projects became my career. Other developers and artists who were working on their own projects while I streamed became the equivalent of coworkers. Johnny hangs out in the streams when he can, and we chat about the work that we're doing. I spent time making my stream a fun place to be, making custom overlays and pixel tubers. I could hop on stream without a camera or perfect lighting now. I added a bunch of commands and advertised my games to new people. Eventually, I started looking at meetups for game developers. This was a thing I started doing back in Phoenix, actually, and I had a ton of fun doing before. So I was excited to see that there was a game dev group in my area. Also, I realized how popular tabletop games are in Oklahoma. I started going to tabletop developer meetups and learned about TokenCon, which is I still haven't been to, but I'm super interested for sure. I started testing my sci-fi card game, Coronal Mass Ejection, again, and got some really great feedback. The people who run the digital game dev group here were busy publishing their game Arctic Awakening, so I was a little disappointed that there weren't a lot of meetups for the digital devs that first year, but the board game devs filled that void. Some devs even went to both meetups, and they both have Discord servers, so I began networking with other devs in my area. For anyone out there listening who hasn't tried this, if you're near a big enough city, I definitely recommend looking online to find game dev meetups and sharing your work with them. For me, it's been something that I very much look forward to. Getting face-to-face feedback is so much better than purely online feedback. I kept chipping away at Pyrotoad and fleshing out the full game of Demon Fish Dead Ahead on stream, but eventually some game jams caught my attention again. GB Compo 2025 was upon us, and I spent 3 months making Front Rooms Normalities, a reverse Backrooms reverse anomaly game that actually started as a joke during one of the Indie Maniac's streams. The Indie Maniac plays a lot of anomaly games and Backrooms games, so I wrote in his chat that I was going to make a game called Front Rooms Normalities, and people in chat got a kick out of the idea. So when the jam came up, the idea had already been festering in my mind. During those streams, another streamer friend, this one named RSVP ASAP, pointed out to me that Low Res Jam was happening soon. Low Res Jam is a 2-week jam, and the game can only take place within a 64 by 64 pixel space. I was excited to try this in GB Studio as a bit of a challenge to myself, and I made something that I thought was pretty interesting. A pet sim dungeon crawler called Fetch Quest. Thanks Indie Maniac for coming up with the name. Unfortunately, I didn't get much feedback and it was widely overlooked. In all honesty, the gameplay is a little confusing and I could probably stand to have made some more explanation or tutorial, but the game is kind of behind me and I don't plan on jumping back into that one at the moment. Front Rooms, on the other hand, is still performing surprisingly well and may see an expanded version make its way to Steam in the future. Then we finished up Pyrotoad. We kind of messed up the launch a little bit. We were so focused on working on it that we didn't make the itch or Steam pages until the game was nearly done, and we probably should have waited to launch it until we had a few more wish lists. We did make a demo and did Next Fest, and that helped a little. Also, we may have priced it a little high at $7.99. We got more purchases after we started discounting it a little bit more. We did put the demo on Newgrounds, where it did phenomenally. It was featured on the front page for months and now has over 10.8 thousand views with tons of positive feedback. Now, it's hard to say how well Newgrounds users were converted to wishlisters, but it's safe to say not many were converted to purchases. It felt great to have the game being played by so many people that definitely enjoyed it though. Another thing to think about is how different platforms have different tastes and genres. Newgrounds loves challenging platformers. That's where Super Meat Boy got its start after all. Steam, on the other hand, is kind of inundated with platformers at this point, and I'm not convinced that Game Boy games are really what the Steam market is looking for right now. Hopefully this changes as more Game Boy games make their way to Steam with tools like Godot Boy and Bubble Wrap, which wrap your homebrew ROMs with an emulator so you can export an executable file that Steam can use. I've been using Godot Boy myself and haven't played with Bubble Wrap yet, but I know that it's also a popular option. After Pyrotoad's launch, I set up the Demon Fish Dead Ahead Steam page and demo, hoping to avoid the mistake of doing a cold-ish launch like with Pyrotoad. Around then, another streamer friend of mine, Westlow Findings, told me about a game jam their VTuber group, Dreamtale Studios, was putting together. At first, I was hesitant, but then I decided to reach out to a couple pixel art streamer friends and ask them if they wanted to make something with me. Taco Crepe and Ias Sprite said yes, and when the jam started, we made VTubers Please, which is a Game Boy Color version of Papers, Please, but with VTubers. Taco and Ias are fantastic artists, and I had my work cut out for me doing all the programming. After 13 days, we had a finished game that we could all be proud of, and it did surprisingly well. People still download it all the time, and since Ias had some life stuff come up during the jam, they weren't able to do as much of the art as they initially wanted to. With Ias's new art, we've updated the game. It's over twice the size that it was. The update's been doing well on itch, but we also published it on Newgrounds where it got on the front page. It's a point and click style game where you play a security guard to a VTuber event in the future where VTubers have remotely controlled robots that they can bring to events, and it's your job to make sure the right VTubers are allowed in and the wrong ones are rejected. It's free, so give it a shot if it sounds interesting. There are a wide variety of characters. Some are based on actual VTubers and streamers and community members. You can actually come across me in the game. Big shout out to Taco and Ias for making the fantastic art for this one. Go check out their streams as well. Shortly after the Dreamtale Studios V-Jam ended, I finally pulled the trigger on buying a new desktop. After over half a year of deciding on parts and watching the market kind of fall apart and some crying, I realized that I should have bought the parts back when I first started shopping, but the prices weren't going to get better. So I just bit the bullet and paid a bit more than what I thought I should for my RAM and GPU. This was the first time I ever put together a custom build, so I was pretty nervous that I would buy the wrong parts or screw them up somehow while building it. So I reached out to my other artist, developer, streamer friend, Cryptic PK, who mods my stream, also DMs a D&D group I've been playing with for 6 or 7 months. Cryptic pointed me to a site called PCPartPicker.com, which helped me figure out what I could buy with my budget and what was compatible. I ended up waiting an extra couple weeks for a processor that was in stock when I ordered it, but apparently wasn't anymore when it was supposed to ship. They kept saying it would be available and if I waited, and then it wasn't when I waited, so I just ended up canceling that order and going through a different seller. Also, since I barely ever order things online, and this is a new address, Amazon kept shipping things to the wrong house. Thankfully, the person at the other address was amazing and dropped the parts off at my place. Building the PC went super smoothly, and I found YouTube videos to help me with anything that I was a little confused about. It runs like a champ. Now I run my streaming software and any game or engine I want at the same time. My streaming setup in OBS had become so RAM hungry with all the bells and whistles that I couldn't even run OBS and Unity at the same time without it choking as soon as I hit the play button in Unity. Games like Helldivers ran fine on my laptop alone, but not with OBS open, even with all the graphics turned down. I did some streams with VR on the old laptop, and it was a nightmare. With the new desktop, it's a breeze. The fans don't even kick into high gear. Originally, I was looking at getting 64 gigs of RAM to kind of future-proof things, but with the recent price gouging, I decided 32 would get me by until the prices stabilized. For the GPU, I went with an AMD and got the Radeon RX 9070 XT. I'd never used AMD before, but I'm pretty happy with it. Now that I can play any VR game, I got into VR chat development, making avatars and worlds, which is a lot of fun and right up my alley since I studied character modeling in college and have done VR development in Unity before. VR chat barely ran at all on my laptop, and now I can crank up the settings on Skyrim VR too. I was totally okay playing games like Cyberpunk 2077 and Sea of Thieves with the graphics turned way down, but holy cow, these games look absolutely stunning cranked to the max. I just got the desktop at the start of 2026, so you are nearly caught up as far as the timeline goes. Just recently, I caught wind of a retro handheld bundle that was coming into existence, and I applied for Pyrotoad to be part of it, and thankfully, Pyrotoad was selected. The bundle just finished selling on itch, and it's so exciting for us because it did really well. 30 hand-curated homebrew games for $30, and it did amazing. Granted, I'm only making like 2% off of the purchases, but it's still pretty huge for us. And Johnny and I are ecstatic that Pyrotoad is getting in the hands of so many handheld fans. Big thanks to the developer behind the bundle, To Think Design Studios, and their game Glory Hunters. They've done a really amazing job promoting it, and a couple big handheld YouTube channels have talked about it. And I can't tell you how much this means to me, especially after Pyrotoad's kind of lackluster Steam launch. I should also mention that Johnny Manjiro has been hard at work making a brand new dungeon crawler for the Game Boy Color, currently called Amazion's 100, which he asked me to do some artwork for. It has an itch page to test the early beta, and he's also working on a new spaceship game, which is still in the early production phases. Search Johnny Manjiro on itch, and check out what he's been up to. He also dropped a new NES game recently called Kerr Manor. In other streamer dev news, Taco Crepe, who I mentioned earlier, who did artwork for VTubers Please, teamed up with another streamer friend of mine, Seagoat Games, in the Girly Game Jam #3 to make Forced to Run a Cupcake Shop, which has done fantastically well. Both of these streamers have been super supportive to me. Taco helps mod my streams. Seagoat is always coming by with donations. It's funny because when I met both of these streamers, they were artists, and now they both make games. I like to think that I helped convince them to get into it. Anyways, show them some support and check out Forced to Run a Cupcake Shop. Now, Forced to Run a Cupcake Shop is actually a shortened version of the name. It's much longer on itch, and that was actually a joke. And since they're putting the game on Steam, they've changed the name to Confections and Conversations. So go wishlist Confections and Conversations on Steam. So like I said, Twitch has become my default platform, and you should come check me out there, or on YouTube. My future content will consist of making art for Giant's upcoming dungeon crawler, finishing the update for VTubers Please. I'm still slowly chipping away at Retro Spaceball, which I'm actually planning to rebrand under the title Blast Orb. Retro Spaceball was actually always a working title. It just took me forever to think of a better one. And it's hard to rebrand something after working on it for over half a decade. Source Hack is still getting updates. Demon Fish Dead Ahead is mostly done, but might still get some tweaks as people test it. Let me know if you want to be a tester for Demon Fish Dead Ahead. I've been screwing around in GB Studio making a game that's a little like Schedule 1 meets Earthbound, but for the Game Boy. It's actually more like this old game Drug Wars that very few people probably remember, but with an art style that feels very Earthbound-like. That game has been fun to just kind of blow off steam with. And even later down the road, BitDropper Volume 2 is probably somewhere on the horizon, as well as the Steam version of Front Room's Normalities, which will probably have double the content. I don't see myself in any game jams in the very near future, but then again, I never really do. They always have a way of creeping up on me. If I do a jam, it will almost certainly be streamed in its entirety. Like I said though, don't be surprised if you catch me playing games with friends, because that is something I enjoy doing also. It's hard to say what games we're going to be playing because we switch it up a lot. But yeah, check out my stream. I'd love to see you there. Before I go, I should also mention that I've been working on a bunch of video content for Wave Games, the YouTube channel, and for TikTok, etc. Some medium length content like 10 minutes or so, and some short form content, mostly GB Studio stuff. I'm working on tutorials and time lapses and have a bunch of really cool ideas in the works. Let me know if there's anything you'd like to see, and help me out with a sub on my studio's YouTube channel. I really appreciate everyone's support. So I guess that's all I really have to say. Don't be surprised if I make more podcast episodes, but also don't be surprised if it takes me another year to do it. If you miss my content, definitely hop on Twitch or YouTube. Rick Oakland on Twitch and Wave Games on YouTube. All the streams are recorded on YouTube, so feel free to jog through some of the old streams if you want. Reach out in chat and say, hey, say you're from the podcast if you really want to blow my mind. I also have a Discord server for Wave Games. I try to trim the fat and keep out the bots, so it's nothing big, but there's a link to it on my Twitch channel if Discord is more your style. Again, let me know that you're from the podcast for extra cool points. We do have a nice little community of devs, artists, streamers, etc., and we'd be happy to accept you there. I still love listening to podcasts and have really enjoyed making this podcast, so I definitely don't want to definitively end the podcast. It's not like that. I just don't have as much of an urge to make content here the way that I used to. This might change, and honestly, I hope I get back into making interviews because that was super useful to me in a multitude of ways. If you get something out of this podcast, let me know. The numbers have never been huge, and I never did this to get big, but if only a handful of people hear it and no one reaches out, then it's really hard for me to tell if I'm making any real impact at all. Recently, I've been listening to a favorite podcast of mine, The Debug Log, which also kind of slowly came to a stop, and I miss it so much that I started listening to the first episodes that came out way back in 2015, and it's still so good. Even if they're talking about things that devs today probably barely remember or never even knew about, like Unity's on GUI, which made me laugh. I definitely remember the hell that was Unity's old UI setup. But yeah, that said, The Debug Log, which very much inspired this podcast, hasn't put out an episode since like 2024, even though in the last episode you could tell that they wanted to make more. My podcast has fallen into a similar pattern, and this episode is to help break that pattern a little bit and tell people why things have gone this way for me, and that I'm still out there making content and there's still places to find me. So please check out those other places, and I'll do my best to not let this platform be silent for too long. Thanks again, everyone, for all the support over the years. I hope to see you on other platforms, and hope to talk to you here again sometime before too long. I really appreciate you listening, and have a great rest of your day.